He thought she was just another black woman he could intimidate, but he had no idea who she really was, or the storm that was about to crash down on him. The Tulane stretch outside of Montgomery, Alabama, was nearly empty that night. A handful of cars rolled past, their headlights slicing through the damp air. The streetlights flickered like they were tired, casting long, stretched shadows over the wet asphalt. It was just after 11 p.m., that strange in-between hour when most people only wanted to be home, and anyone still on the road was either working late or trying to outrun something. Commander Alyssa Grant had been driving for nearly 2 hours, one hand on the wheel, the other tapping a slow rhythm against her thigh. She hummed along to the saxophone solo from an old Coltrane track drifting from her car speakers. No uniform tonight, just a plain black sweater, fitted jeans, and hair pulled back into a tight knot. She didn't stand out. At least, she thought she didn't. Then came the lights, red and blue, flashing in her rear view, gaining fast. Her stomach tightened, not from fear, but from the weary recognition of what usually followed. She clicked her blinker, changed lanes, and eased her car onto the shoulder. The tires crunched over loose gravel before coming to a stop. A slow breath in, both hands visible on the wheel. She had worn the Navy uniform long enough to know the drill. The white patrol car stopped a few yards behind her, its headlights glaring in her mirrors. The driver's door opened, and he got out like he owned the road. Sergeant Mason Cole moved with the swagger of a man who had never been told no in his life. Heavy boots scuffing against the pavement, one hand resting on his belt, the other flicking a flashlight to life. Alyssa kept her head turned just enough to see him approach through her side mirror. The beam swept across her car, pausing just long enough to feel invasive. License and registration, he said flatly. No greeting. No explanation. Alyssa's eyes found the glint of his badge in the mirror before she moved. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into the glove box, retrieved her documents, and held them out. "Was I speeding, officer?" she asked, her voice calm, steady. Cole took the papers, but didn't answer right away. He gave her vehicle a slow once-over, then said, "Tail lights out." "That can't be right," she replied, brows knitting slightly. His gaze snapped to hers, lips curling just enough to be condescending. "Are you arguing with me?" A beat passed. Alyssa felt the air between them shift, that silent collision point where power expected submission. She'd seen it before, on foreign bases, during interrogation drills, intense negotiations where a single word could tilt the outcome. "I'm saying my tail lights were inspected 2 weeks ago," she answered evenly. "But if there's an issue, I'll get it fixed." "Step out of the car." Cole cut her off, voice hard now. She exhaled slowly, glancing toward the passing traffic. No one slowing down. No witnesses. "Mind telling me why?" "Because I said so." The words hung in the cool night air. She studied him for a moment, then unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the door. The air outside was sharper than she expected, carrying the faint smell of rain and oil from the road. She stepped out, posture relaxed but ready. "Turn around." Hand on the car. "For what reason?" she asked, still calm. Cole stepped closer, smirk fading into something harder. "Are you resisting?" "No," she said, holding a stare. "I'm asking a question." Something flickered in his eyes. Annoyance, maybe even a trace of doubt, but he masked it quickly. He reached for his radio, muttering, "Non-compliant driver," before raising his voice again. "Turn around." Alyssa's pulse ticked up, but her breathing stayed even. "Officer," she said, tone low but cutting to the night, "I know exactly what I'm allowed to do, and exactly what you can't do." That got to him. His jaw tightened. "You're under arrest," he snapped, stepping forward, reaching for her wrist. She moved back just enough to make him miss. "For what?" "Obstructing an officer." She knew the game now. This wasn't about a tail light. This was about control, and his need to prove he had it. Her options narrowed. Comply now and fight later, or push back and risk escalation. Slowly, deliberately, she turned, placing her palms flat on the roof of her car. The metal felt cool against her skin. Cole yanked her arms behind her, locking the cuffs tighter than necessary. Her wrists burned almost instantly. "You don't know what you're doing," she murmured. "I know exactly what I'm doing," he replied, shoving her toward the patrol car. She slid into the hard plastic seat, the cuffs biting deeper. Her reflection in the partition glass looked calm, almost attached. But beneath it, something was coiled, waiting. The door slammed. Cole strutted back to his seat, whistling like it was just another night. "Well, well," he said as the engine roared back to life. "Let's take a little ride." The patrol car pulled away from the shoulder, lights still flashing. And Alyssa Grant, hands bound, simply stared out into the darkness, already thinking 3 steps ahead. Because Mason Cole had no idea who he had just put in his back seat. The ride to the station was silent, except for the low hum of the engine and the occasional static from Cole's radio. Alyssa sat motionless in back, her wrists aching against the cuffs, but her mind was working in precise, disciplined beats. Her breathing stayed slow, almost meditative. Cole glanced at her reflection in the rear view, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You know," he said casually, "most people don't mouth off during a traffic stop. They just do what they're told." "Most officers," she replied evenly, "don't arrest people for asking a question." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You must think you're somebody." "I don't think," she said, eyes fixed on him through the glass. "I know." The words landed harder than she expected. His hands flexed on the steering wheel before he looked away. The road stretched on, dark and empty. Alyssa watched the blurred lights of the city approach, her reflection flickering in and out as they passed under street lamps. They pulled into a squat, brick building with a nearly empty parking lot. The station's exterior lights buzzed faintly, casting a dull yellow glow over the entrance. Cole parked in a reserved spot, killed the engine, and turned toward her with a smug half-smile. "Gotta say," he murmured, "I do love when they make it easy." She didn't respond. The back door swung open, and the night air hit her again. Cole's grip on her arm was firm, guiding, no, shoving her toward the entrance. Inside, the air was stale, tinged with old coffee and something metallic. The desk sergeant barely looked up from his paperwork as Cole rattled off her information. Processing was mechanical. Fingerprints, mugshot, a half-hearted recitation of rights. No one asked why she was there. No one questioned the charge. This, Alyssa thought, was how men like Cole thrived, behind walls of indifference. When it was over, Cole snapped the cuffs back on and led her toward the holding cells. "Think you're smart?" he muttered under his breath. "I don't have to think," she said without looking at him. His grip tightened. "Enjoy your stay," he sneered, shoving her into the cell. The bars clanged shut, the lock clicking into place. Alyssa sat on the metal bench, the cold seeping through her jeans. She'd slept in far worse conditions, in deserts, in war zones, in barracks where every sound carried. But this was different. This was personal. The faint murmur of voices drifted from the front desk. She closed her eyes and listened. The shuffle of papers, the ring of a distant phone, the clatter of a coffee cup. Control the breath. Control the mind. It was basic training, drilled into her long before her first deployment. Then she heard it. Heavy, confident footsteps. Cole. He appeared in front of her cell, arms crossed, that same arrogant rhythm in his stride. "Comfy?" She didn't answer. "You know," he said, leaning on the bars, "if you just played along, you wouldn't be in here right now." She tilted her head slightly, letting a slow smile touch her lips. "Oh, I'm exactly where I need to be." His smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before he scoffed and looked toward the empty holding area. "No one's coming to get you tonight," he said. "Guess that means you'll have plenty of time to think about that attitude." She stayed silent, letting him fill the space with his own voice. "People like you," he went on, lowering his tone, "think the rules don't apply. You think a little confidence is enough to get out of trouble." She met his stare. "You really don't know what kind of trouble you just stepped in, do you?" Before he could respond, another officer appeared from the hallway. A younger man, maybe late 20s, holding a clipboard. Sergeant Cole," the officer said, his tone uncertain. "We got a call. You should probably take this." Cole barely glanced at him. "It can wait." "No," the officer insisted. shifting on his feet. "I think you want to see this." Cole's eyes narrowed. He gave Alyssa one last look before walking away. From her bench, she caught pieces of the conversation. Lawyer, higher up, asking why she's being held. Cole's voice dropped low, clipped with irritation. The younger officer's replies were quick, nervous. A minute later, Cole's footsteps returned, heavier, faster. His jaw was tight now, his fists clenched at his sides. "What the hell did you do?" he demanded. Alyssa leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "I didn't do anything, but people talk, and some of us have friends in very high places." His face darkened. That was the moment she saw it. The crack in his confidence. The first sign that Mason Cole realized this wasn't going to play out the way he expected. And for Alyssa, that was the beginning of the end for him. Morning light poured through the tall courthouse windows, catching the polished wood in warm streaks. The air was crisp, almost cold enough to bite, the kind of chill that made you sit straighter in your chair. Commander Alyssa Grant stood beside the defense table, posture relaxed but eyes sharp. She was no longer in a holding cell, no longer in handcuffs. Instead, she wore a tailored navy blazer over a simple cream blouse, her hair pulled into a sleek bun. Beside her, her attorney Carla Whitman shuffled through a stack of papers with precision that told Alyssa she'd been up since dawn. No small talk, no wasted motion. That's why Alyssa liked her. Carla understood that victory came from preparation, not theatrics. The heavy doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Sergeant Mason Cole walked in. He still carried himself like a man who believed he owned the space, shoulders squared, chin lifted. But Alyssa noticed a stiffness in his stride. The confidence was still there, but it wasn't pure anymore. It was mixed with something else. Doubt. For the briefest moment, their eyes met. Cole looked away first. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Samuel Kirkland entered, a tall, silver-haired man whose tired eyes hinted at years of sorting truth from lies. "Let's get to it," he said, flipping open the case file. The prosecutor, Martin Hayes, rose to his feet. "Your Honor, we believe Commander Grant was unlawfully detained without probable cause," he began. "Furthermore, newly surfaced information indicates a troubling pattern of misconduct from the arresting officer, Sergeant Cole." A murmur rippled through the small crowd in the gallery. Reporters' pens scratched over notepads, the sound almost like rain. Cole shifted in his seat, jaw tightening. Judge Kirkland peered at him over his glasses. "Sergeant Cole, would you care to explain?" Cole leaned forward. "Your Honor, the defendant was uncooperative during a routine traffic stop." "Uncooperative?" Hayes interrupted. He picked up a single sheet of paper. "Commander Grant's service record shows a decorated military career, multiple commendations, no criminal history, and no prior traffic violations. Are you telling us she was such a threat that you had to arrest her over a broken taillight?" Cole's mouth opened, then closed. Hayes didn't give him a chance to regroup. "In addition, your arrest history shows a disproportionate number of traffic stops involving black drivers in this district." The murmurs grew louder. Kirkland set the file down. "Sergeant, that's a serious allegation." Cole's voice came out more defensive now. "I was following procedure. The body cam footage says otherwise." Hayes cut in, signaling to the bailiff. A screen descended at the front of the courtroom. The footage rolled. Cole's voice commanding. Alyssa's voice calm and measured. The unnecessary escalation. The smirk as the cuffs tightened. The room was silent when the video ended. Even the reporters seemed to hold their breath. Judge Kirkland leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Sergeant Cole, what I just saw is not procedure. It's intimidation. The charges against Commander Grant are dismissed, effective immediately." The gavel cracked against the desk, sharp and final. "And," the judge added, turning to the prosecutor, "I recommend that the district attorney's office conduct a full review of Sergeant Cole's conduct. This court will not ignore patterns of abuse." Cole looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. His face flushed red, hands curling into fists, but he didn't speak. For the first time since she'd met him, Alyssa saw him without the shield of his badge. Vulnerable. As she gathered her things, she glanced at him one last time. No words. None needed. She'd already won. The police station felt different now. Not in any way visible. Same humming fluorescent lights. Same stale coffee smell. But the air had shifted. People spoke in quieter tones. Conversation stopped when Mason Cole walked past. He kept his chin up, but the weight was there in his steps. Every glance from his colleagues felt sharper now. Every sideways look a silent question. What did you do? In his office. The blinds were half-drawn, casting thin bars of shadow across his desk. The phone hadn't stopped ringing since the hearing. First the chief, then internal affairs, then a reporter who somehow had his direct line. Cole sat in the leather chair that once felt like a throne. Now it just felt small. The door opened without a knock. Captain Ray Morales stepped in, his expression unreadable. Close the door, Morales said flatly. Cole obeyed. The captain dropped a manila envelope on the desk. Inside, printed emails, citizen complaints, and a formal letter stamped administrative leave, pending investigation. Cole's throat tightened. This is ridiculous, he muttered. That woman, Morales interrupted, is a commander in the U.S. Navy with friends in places you don't even know exist. His voice was calm, but it carried the kind of weight that made arguments die in your throat. You think I'm scared of... Cole started, but Morales cut him off again. This isn't about fear. It's about the fact that you've been sloppy and arrogant, and now the whole department's about to bleed for it. The silence that followed was thick. Cole looked down at the letter again, at the neat block of text that spelled out his suspension. Without pay. Morales turned to leave, pausing at the door. You've made a lot of enemies, Mason. You might want to think about how many of them are smiling right now. The door shut behind him. Across town, Alyssa sat in a quiet corner of Harper's Cafe, a small place tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop. She cradled a steaming mug of black coffee, letting the warmth seep into her hands. The trial was over, the charges gone, but she knew better than to call it finished. Men like Cole didn't vanish overnight. They lingered, shifted tactics, found new ways to dig in. Still, there was a satisfaction in knowing she'd struck the first blow. Her phone buzzed. A text from Carla. Cole's been suspended. IA investigation underway. It's making the news. Alyssa smiled, not the gloating kind, but the quiet, measured one of someone who'd seen justice up close and knew how rare it was. She looked out the window. The sun had broken through the clouds, spilling light over the street. For the first time in days, the air felt lighter. That evening, Cole sat in his darkened apartment, staring at the muted television. News anchors discussed his name like it was a case study. Every detail picked apart. Every past arrest suddenly under review. He reached for the remote, then stopped. He couldn't bring himself to turn it off, because deep down he knew this wasn't just about Alyssa Grant. This was about every choice he'd made, every line he'd crossed thinking no one would call him on it. And now, someone had. The weeks after the court cases slipped by quietly, almost too quietly. For Alyssa Grant, silence had never been a comfort. It was a sign that something was moving beneath the surface. She returned to her duties at the naval base, falling back into routine. Meetings, briefings, training oversight. But her instincts, sharpened over years in service, kept whispering that the fight wasn't done. One evening, she stayed late at the base office, finishing reports. The building was nearly empty, the fluorescent lights humming above. When she stepped outside, the parking lot was dim under the orange glow of the street lamps. She froze. Her car door was slightly ajar. The base was secure, cameras covering every corner, but the sight still sent a ripple of caution through her. She approached slowly, scanning her surroundings, her other hand slipping into her blazer pocket, where she kept her small tactical flashlight. Inside, nothing seemed taken. No broken glass, no torn upholstery. But on the driver's seat, there was a single folded piece of paper. No name, no signature. She unfolded it. Stay in your lane. Her jaw tightened. No threats about what would happen. No direct mention of Cole. But the meaning was clear. She slid the note into an evidence bag she kept in her trunk, the kind of habit only someone like her would have. Then she drove away without a glance back. Across town, Mason Cole sat at a dimly lit table in the corner of a sports bar. He wasn't in uniform anymore. The IA investigation was dragging on, and the media had moved other stories, but the whispers in the department hadn't stopped. A man slid into the seat across from him. Vince Laramie, a former cop who'd been forced out years ago for excessive methods. His smirk was all calculation. "You still want her out of the picture?" Vince asked, voice low. Cole didn't answer right away. He stared into his drink, thinking about the courtroom, the body cam footage, the way she looked at him afterward. Not with fear, but with the kind of certainty that told him she'd always be one step ahead. "Yes," he finally said, "but it has to be clean. No heat." Vince leaned back, grinning. "Clean's my specialty." Back in her apartment, Alyssa sat at her desk, the note in front of her. Her phone rang. It was Carla. "I've been hearing chatter," Carla said without preamble. "Cole's been seen with some people who don't exactly play by the book. You should be careful." Alyssa leaned back in her chair. "I'm always careful." Carla paused. "I know, but I think this time you should be ready for anything." Alyssa's gaze shifted to the framed Navy commendations on her wall. She'd fought harder battles than this, but she knew this one would be different, because this wasn't about orders or missions. This was personal. The following Friday night, rain slicked the streets of Brookfield. Downtown was quiet, the kind of quiet that came before trouble. Alyssa had taken Carla's warning to heart. She changed her routes, varied her schedule, and kept her senses sharpened like a blade. Still, trouble had a way of finding her. It was just after 9 p.m. when she left O'Hara's Market, carrying 2 grocery bags toward her car. Halfway there, she caught the faintest reflection in a shop window, a dark sedan idling 2 rows over, lights off. Her pace didn't change, but her pulse quickened. She unlocked her car and slid the bags inside, deliberately turning her body, so her right hand stayed free. The sedan's engine rumbled to life. Inside the car, Vince Laramie adjusted his grip on the wheel. Cole sat in the passenger seat, his hood pulled low. "This is your one shot," Vince said, his tone almost casual. Cole's jaw clenched. "I know." They rolled forward slowly, headlights still off, closing the gap. Alyssa, meanwhile, stepped around to the driver's side, her expression calm, but her eyes locked on the sedan's movement. She wasn't guessing anymore. This was it. Her thumb flicked open the clasp of her shoulder holster. The sedan swerved suddenly, trying to cut her off. In the same instant, Alyssa sidestepped, drew her weapon, and leveled it at the windshield. "Out of the vehicle," she commanded, voice like steel. Vince froze, hands instinctively going up. Cole's face twisted in rage, but he knew better than to test her now. Sirens were already wailing in the distance. The responding officers weren't from Cole's old circle. These were from the State Investigations Unit, who had been tipped off hours earlier by an anonymous call. That call had come from Carla. Vince was hauled out first, cuffed, and read his rights. Cole followed, shouting about entrapment, about setups, but no one was listening anymore. Alyssa stood in the rain, her weapon holstered, watching as the 2 men were taken away. Morales himself arrived minutes later. "I don't know how you pulled this off," he said, "but you just ended his career for good." Alyssa gave a faint smile. "I didn't pull off alone." 2 days later, headlines blazed. Suspended officer arrested in foil retaliation plot. Navy commander thwarts alleged attack. For Alyssa, it wasn't about the headlines. It was about knowing the shadow that had followed her was finally gone. She returned to her duties, the base gates closing behind her as the sun broke through the clouds. Some battles were fought in court, some in the streets. This one, she thought, was fought in the shadows, and she'd made sure the light won.